Welcome in everyone to the new channel. My name is Kyle Yates. This is where Dynasty content lives. Let's get back to the roots. Let's run it. Man, this feels good to be back. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the YouTube channel. Make sure to do a couple things here for me before we get into Dynasty wide receivers to buy. Hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell to get notified for when new content drops. I'm not charging for any of my content. You're going to find stuff over on my Substack. You can find that here in the YouTube description. And I am just going to be cranking out a ton of free content for you guys with the Dynasty lens. So your biggest way in which you can help me out here as I venture back into the fantasy football space is to like the video, subscribe, comment. That helps out a ton here as it turns into more and more views, which help me and just continue to create content. So thank you so much. Drop a comment here. Would love to hear from you guys as we roll through these Dynasty wide receivers to buy. I've got a list here of 8 players. Let's dive in. All right, first wide receiver to buy here. And I just want to say this really quick. With a lot of these players, there are going to be some very, very obvious buys. Some players to go trade for at the wide receiver position that are very obvious, that you can get at a very, very significant discount based on how your league is viewing them. There are going to be other players that I mentioned on this list that are not going to be these massive discount players, but ones that I could see being worth their value right now that could take another step forward in years to come. From a dynasty standpoint, we play within 2 to 3 year windows. These are not players that you're going to roster for the next 10 years. Don't overvalue these players and overinflate the value that you place on youth, right? These players that are rookies should not be valued the same way as some of these top tier wide receivers from a dynasty standpoint, like Puka Nacua, right? Just because they're brand new into the league doesn't mean that they are instantly overvalued. So kind of balance that out. We'll talk through it. We'll place it all here as we go throughout this. Let's go to the first wide receiver here. That is going to be Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. An absolutely incredible start to the year for Emeka Egbuka. This was a player that was very highly touted coming into the NFL draft last year, ends up going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and a landing spot that many people were not super excited about, right? Mike Evans, Chris Godwin just re-signed, coming off the injury, but a place that we weren't really super excited for Egbuka to land. But yet, even throughout the first several weeks of the season, we saw him contribute and we saw that top-tier talent deliver. Crazy stat here for you. Emeka Egbuka scored more fantasy football points, 89.9 half PPR points in the first 5 weeks of the NFL season this year than he did from weeks 6 through 18 at 74.3. Absolutely incredible start to the year. You think that you have absolutely hit a home run in your dynasty rookie draft, and then the wheels absolutely fall off. Towards the end of the year, he's averaging 3 points, fantasy points per game. In week 18, 1.3 fantasy points. It is worth noting here that he did suffer a hamstring injury in week 6. And even though he did come back to play, he didn't miss any time. That certainly could have been a factor in the drop-off in production. Chris Godwin starting to ramp back up also could have been a factor in this. The offensive ecosystem with Baker Mayfield there and the offensive coordinator in Tampa now, who has been fired already. We don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be next year. There's a lot of variables that went in here to Egbuka not producing at the level that we thought he was going to based on the first several weeks of the season. Now moving forward, Mike Evans, does he retire? Does he come back for another year? I don't think he plays anywhere else other than Tampa. But if he does come back, I think we're now going to be at the point where it's like 1-year deals for Mike Evans as we move throughout the tail ends of his career. He's not going to be able to continue to produce at the same way that he has in years past. So I think that opens up an opportunity for Egbuka to produce in the way that Tampa thought he was going to, because that's why they spent the premium draft pick on him, right? They have a plan for how to use him, and the talent level is there. So he is currently, if you look at Dynasty League football, from a Dynasty startup ADP, wide receiver 11. In my Dynasty rankings, wide receiver 12. So I'm actually a little bit lower than the consensus here, but I preach this all the time when talking about dynasty players, that dynasty buy low opportunities are created when expectations are not met. And if you have someone who in your league has Egbuka and is really, really disappointed based on how the last several weeks of the season, the last 12, 13 weeks of the season went for him, and that they continue to put him into their starting lineup and it continued to not work, there is a way that you can go get Egbuka in your league, because I think he's going to take another step forward next year. A couple of players that I have him above in the rankings, George Pickens, a fantastic year for Pickens, and I think he re-signs in Dallas this next year, but there's a world that he doesn't. He hits the free agent market, he wants to cash in, and ends up in a situation that's much, much worse than what he had in Dallas this year. So I would take Egbuka over Pickens. Rashee Rice has moved down the dynasty rankings for me, now all the way down to wide receiver 13. That has to do with more of the off the field stuff going on with Rashee Rice. It's not been confirmed, but there has been a report about domestic violence and an allegation there. So this is just now from the risk reward for Rashee Rice from a dynasty standpoint. Redraft ADP, I think, is a redraft standpoint. I think it's going to be fine to continue to buy into Rashee Rice. From a dynasty, it's just getting to the point where I'm going to be a little bit concerned. I would take Egbuka over Rashee Rice. Can you trade away Rice in your dynasty league? Go get Egbuka plus something. Garrett Wilson, Lad McConkey, a couple of players here that we will talk about in this dynasty buy low wide receiver list. Chris Olave, Brian Thomas Jr. I would take Egbuka over all of them. I just said we would talk about him. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson next here. Wide receiver for the New York Jets, and very, very injured season here for Garrett Wilson in New York in an absolute dumpster fire of a situation, which has been the story of his career up to this point. He re-signs in New York, and we think that Garrett Wilson could have hit the free agent market and gone to a different situation where he could have been an absolute fantasy football superstar. Chooses to resign in New York, gets a ton of volume over the first 6 weeks of the season, and has a few decent, solid fantasy performances in there. Wide receiver 6 fantasy finish in week 1, week 3, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 11 in week 4. Wide receiver 4 finish in week 3, wide receiver 11 finish in week 4, wide receiver 10 finish in week 5, and then wheels fall off, gets injured, tries to come back off the bye week, gets injured again, and misses from week 11 on. So now the question just becomes, who is the quarterback in New York? Who's the quarterback going to be that's going to elevate Garrett Wilson and his talent level to be able to be a fantasy viable wide receiver and consistent wide receiver? They're picking towards the top of the draft. Does Dante Moore, the quarterback out of Oregon, does he come out? Is that a situation where it elevates Garrett Wilson? Do they take a swing at trading for a quarterback this offseason? Is that a situation where New York could start to get involved in that and utilizing the draft capital that they have and taking a major swing to get a quarterback that becomes available on the trade market? Did they go into the free agent market? I don't think they're going to move forward with Justin Fields, with Tyrod Taylor. I think they're done with this. I think they're done with the quarterback carousel, and they're going to try to elevate. This may be one of the last opportunities to go get Garrett Wilson before he truly explodes. The value, I think, is at an all-time low for Garrett Wilson and the public perception of Garrett Wilson. That's sort of the argument here. There's not really a ton of stats that you can look at and say Garrett Wilson excelled in this area just because the quarterback play was so bad, but yet the volume was there to offset that. And again, 4 top 12 finishes in the first 6 weeks of the season, I'll take that with terrible quarterback play. If he can get reliable, steady, consistent quarterback play, I think we see Garrett Wilson just absolutely explode back up into that top 8 in the dynasty wide receiver conversation. Right now, he hangs out at wide receiver 14 in my dynasty rankings, just a little bit lower than where he was last year. All right, let's go wide receiver 15 in the dynasty rankings for me right now. That's Lad McConkey, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. Rookie season, very, very solid rookie year. Emerges and really proved that my evaluation of him coming out of Georgia was correct. I had him as a top 5 wide receiver in that draft class, and McConkey excelled. Now, we get into this next year. We think he's going to take a massive step forward. I remember drafting him in redraft leagues thinking that I had just absolutely hit a home run. And as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 on my roster, thinking that it's going to be over for the rest of my league mates. And just the efficiency cratered this season. According to Next Gen Stats, Lad McConkey ran 62.3% of his routes from the slot this season, the 5th highest rate among wide receivers with at least 300 routes run. On those routes, he averaged only 1.2 yards per route run, which was half of his 2024 mark, 2.4, all the while posting 5.8 yards per target, nearly 5 yards fewer than his 10.7 average last year. Long story short, what that tweet means, the efficiency just cratered. It was just an absolute mess in Los Angeles this season. You have the biggest, I think one of the biggest things that we can point to, one, Keenan Allen coming back in and stealing a ridiculous amount of targets. Seems like malpractice and could be the reason why Greg Roman is no longer the offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. One of the main reasons why Greg Roman is no longer the offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. Keenan Allen getting as many targets as he did this season. But the offensive line, and when you have Rashawn Slater go down, when you have Joe Alt go down, led to this offensive structure and the game plan really falling completely apart. I mean, you watched the wild card playoff game here, and you just see the offensive line getting pushed back into Justin Herbert's lap. Play after play, just no opportunity to go and make plays and read the field. And it's illustrated by this point where there were 4 games registered this year where a quarterback faced 28 or more pressures in a single game. 4 instances where the quarterback faced 28 or more pressures in a single game. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. Justin Herbert had 3 of the 4. Shedeur Sanders was the only other quarterback who faced more than 28 pressures in a single game. Otherwise, Justin Herbert did it 3 times. So the offensive game plan here just did not work, did not have answers to be able to pivot to when everything went to fire, when everything went down the sewer. So Ladd McConkey going into next year, Keenan Allen, I don't expect to be back in Los Angeles. Can we see McConkey become the key focal part of this offense again? I think we can. And I think right now the value for McConkey is lower than what it's going to be moving forward. Even the Greg Roman firing that happened earlier today as I sit down to record this, that was a massive step forward for me to have confidence in buying Ladd McConkey from a dynasty standpoint. I'm back in on McConkey for 2026 and beyond. Let's go to Chicago. Let's go Luther Burden here, wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. I talked about this at the beginning of the video, that there are going to be some players that are obvious buys. Then there are going to be other players that you're going to have to meet the value, right? You're going to have to pay up, quote unquote, but still worth buying for their ascension in 2026 and beyond. I think Luther Burden fits that category. Now, there is a stat that I came across earlier today that is just absolutely insane. Bears wide receiver Luther Burden finished the NFL regular season with the highest yards per route mark, 2.8, for any rookie in the Next Gen Stats era since 2016. That yards per route mark of 2.8 was only behind Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith-Njigba for the entire NFL. That's how good Luther Burden was this year. Now, was the volume there throughout the entire year? No. But this is still a rookie wide receiver learning the intricacies of a very, very complex offense. And I think moving into 2026 and beyond, paired with Caleb Williams and the strides that he made this year under Ben Johnson in his first year, Colston Loveland's going to dominate targets. I think Loveland is a top 3 dynasty tight end. But Luther Burden showing what he did here this year makes me very, very confident buying him and paying up for what he can be moving forward. This is the crazy part. Again, Dynasty League Football, my friends over at DLF, go check out their site. Absolutely incredible. Their startup ADP from December, so take that into account. This is before Luther Burden really, really exploded. But from December, wide receiver 32 in Dynasty startup ADP. I have him at wide receiver 19 in my Dynasty rankings right now. That is above players like Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison Jr., T. Higgins, Jamison Williams. Give me Luther Burden. It's a conversation of A.J. Brown versus Luther Burden for me in Dynasty right now. Brian Thomas Jr. or Luther Burden. That's where we're at with valuing this player, and I think I would not be shocked if I do this video again this time next year and Luther Burden's in the top 8 Dynasty wide receivers for me. Like, that's how confident I am in Luther Burden taking this another step into 2026 and beyond. So go buy Luther Burden right now. If you can take someone like A.J. Brown, who did not have the greatest season, did not have the greatest end of the year, I understand that. But take him plus something and go get Luther Burden. I think you walk away with a steal from that trade. A 2026 second, a late 2026 first in A.J. Brown for Luther Burden. I don't know if that gets done. Depends on your league and certainly your league mates. But let me know. Chime in on the YouTube comments. Let me know what you would be willing to give up for Luther Burden. If you've made a trade recently in your Dynasty League, let me know what you got Luther Burden for. I would love to see those. All right, let's keep it moving here. Alec Pierce, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, has a fantastic year here in his contract year. Goes over 1,000 yards, a ridiculous yards per reception. Absolutely utilized deep downfield. Daniel Jones unlocking Alec Pierce was something that I did not have on my bingo card for 2025, but it happened, and Alec Pierce took a massive step forward as a fantasy contributor. Now, the key part here for why I'm willing to buy him is that he goes into free agency right now. This is his offseason where he's going to head into free agency and could wind up in a very, very different situation. Now, there's risk reward here, right? This is something where you need to potentially go after buying Alec Pierce, but at the same time, acknowledge that there is some risk here. As he goes into free agency, could be a much worse situation than what he had here in Indianapolis this year. He could be hit with a franchise tag. He could come back in 2026 to the Indianapolis Colts, sign a long-term contract extension. That could certainly be the case. Daniel Jones probably not going to be ready for the start of 2026. All things to be weary of and aware of. But yet at the same time, what if Alec Pierce goes and signs with the Washington Commanders, who have a ton of money to spend in free agency? What if he signs with the Las Vegas Raiders, who will most likely get Fernando Mendoza in the draft? Like, to be utilized as a deep downfield threat here with a quarterback like Jayden Daniels, who can absolutely, when he's healthy, put it right on the money deep downfield. Like, I think that could really unlock this offense in Washington to then allow Terry McLaurin to go at all three levels of the field. That's something to be aware. I think that could work out here in Buffalo. Do they go and say, we're so tired of having Khalil Shakir as our wide receiver one, let's go get a deep downfield threat like Alec Pierce, who could really open things up? I think that's something to be excited about. And so Alec Pierce is someone that I'm willing to go after from a dynasty perspective. To put it into context here, he's wide receiver 35 for me, right above guys like Michael Pittman Jr., Devontae Adams, Quentin Johnston, Jaden Higgins, and right below DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin. So that's sort of the range that I'm putting Alec Pierce in. I think he's a buy going into free agency. Another player who there really isn't a ton of stats to justify going after and being aggressive in acquiring, but heading into free agency, again, is the key here for why I'm willing to go buy Romeo Doubs, a wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. The talent has been there. We've seen moments of Romeo Doubs being a fantasy contributor. The consistency has been the issue, right? There have been so many times where I've done waiver wire episodes where it's like, all right, go pick up Romeo Doubs because he had 8 receptions for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the next week he's back down to 2 receptions for 30 yards, right? Like, there's just no consistency. And I think a big part of that in Green Bay has been the mouths to feed, where you've got Tucker Kraft as the main primary read in this offense, and justifiably so. But even when he goes down, there's Luke Musgrave to come in and steal away some targets. Christian Watson coming back this year and looking really, really good based on how he's looked in the past, coming off of the injury. I did not expect that to happen. Christian Watson takes away targets. They go spend a first-round pick on Matthew Golden, who doesn't score a touchdown until the wild card round, but still, that's a first-round pick. They're signaling that they don't expect Romeo Doubs to be here next year. Jayden Reed taking away targets when he's fully healthy, which didn't happen a ton here this past year. So there have always been excuses and reasons why we can look to Romeo Doubs not producing at an elite level. Now, as we head into free agency for Doubs, I think there is a potential that he winds up being a very key piece here. I think he could be one of the sneaky players in free agency that gets a lot more money than we think he's going to get. I think he does the little things really well. I think he can be an X receiver in this league, and not necessarily a top tier one, but one that I think could be in an offense that could get a lot more volume than what he's gotten previously. So I don't know necessarily what the situations would be for me that I would feel like, okay, Doubs is going to wind up, if Doubs goes to this offense, then he's going to be a top 30 wide receiver week in and week out. I don't think we need to go so far down the road where we're really, really overvaluing him. Again, he's wide receiver 59 in my dynasty rankings. So this is not a player that I, right now, am super, super confident in. But I think for third round pick, late second round pick, I think you can get that done in your league. And there's some players here that I would rate him over, such as Jalen McMillan, Jalen Knoll, Trey Harris, Alec Pierce from Tennessee, Rashad Bateman, Kayshon Boutte. In New England, there's some players here that I would put Doubs above. And the Dynasty Startup ADP is signaling that the majority of Dynasty managers do not value Doubs at all. All right, 7th wide receiver that I am looking to buy here in Dynasty going into this offseason is Parker Washington for the Jacksonville Jaguars. This was someone that at this time last year, I did a video saying that Parker Washington was a player that I was trying to acquire and steal for dirt cheap in Dynasty leagues, because I thought that he could emerge here as a very, very solid wide receiver with Christian Kirk being moved on from. I thought that the slot receiver position and role opened up in this offense. Then they go draft Travis Hunter, and that kind of puts some cold water on Parker Washington's outlook. Then they go trade for, he doesn't really do it much throughout the first part of the season. Then they go trade for Jacoby Myers, and suddenly this offense just takes an absolute monstrous step forward. Here's the crazy stat. Parker Washington had more fantasy finishes as a top 15 wide receiver this season, which was 5, than Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. combined. Now, that has a lot to say about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. and how much of a disappointment they were here this year. But yet at the same time, Parker Washington, especially in the fantasy playoffs, was absolutely stellar. And we need to acknowledge that I think he's carved out a role for himself in this offense. Now, Jacksonville hands the contract extension to Jacoby Myers. Then you've got Brian Thomas Jr., who I think what we saw here in 2025 is not indicative of what we're going to see moving forward. So I think he'll bounce back next year. When Travis Hunter comes back, where does he play? Is that going to be the slot wide receiver role, or now do they look at this offense and see how well all these players played together and say, I think we can put Travis Hunter back at corner, full-time corner, sprinkle him in some plays on offense. That's, I think, the most likely outcome. Again, let me know your thoughts on that in the YouTube comments. I'd really be interested to see what you guys think on that. But I think Parker Washington played his way into a very consistent role next year and beyond. Now, he's in his contract year. Based on how much money Jacksonville has sunk into the wide receiver position, I don't know if he necessarily re-signs with Jacksonville in 2027. So he could hit the free agent market, really carve out a really nice role for himself in another offense that doesn't have as many question marks. Either way, I'm going after Parker Washington because the big thing too, Dynasty startup ADP, Parker Washington is like wide receiver 75 off the board. I've got him way higher than that. Wide receiver 63, a player that I think is absolutely worth throwing a third-round pick at, second-round pick, late second-round pick, or go, I mean, there are so many players that I think you can look at leveraging here. Isaac Tesla, if someone is super excited about Tesla in your league, he's wide receiver 80 in my Dynasty rankings. I'm not super excited about him being a reliable, steady fantasy contributor. So if someone is in your league and really excited about what he can be, then I would go trade him for Parker Washington. But it's all signaling Washington is a value right now in Dynasty leagues. Final wide receiver that I'm buying in Dynasty leagues right now is Jayden Reed, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Talked about Romeo Doubs most likely exiting this team here in this offseason, which is going to put Jayden Reed back into a conversation of being a starting wide receiver, less mouths to feed. I don't think that Green Bay is going to spend another premium pick on a wide receiver this offseason. I could be proven wrong. Who knows? But moving forward, you potentially have Christian Watson and Jayden Reed and Matthew Golden as the starting three wide receivers here. I think we need to just take all of 2025 and put a little asterisk next to it for Jayden Reed is really the argument and why I bring him up here, because I think that what we saw from him this year in an injury-riddled campaign, when he comes back, is not fully 100%. Then you've got Matthew Golden, Christian Watson, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. Like I talked about this with Doubs. The list goes on and on for the amount of mouths to feed in this offense. Emmanuel Wilson, Josh Jacobs out of the backfield, Chris Brooks. So many mouths to feed. Jayden Reed's a very, very talented wide receiver. As a slot wide receiver, as someone you can get the ball in his hands and let him create after the catch, we've seen that in previous years. And I don't think that what we saw here this last year is what's going to be the case moving forward. Move him down the rankings? Certainly. You have to. You have to account for that. Wide receiver 45 in my Dynasty rankings right now, right next to Khalil Shakir. But that's still a player that you can plug into your flex as a wide receiver 3, maybe, depending on how you build your roster. Like, you can live with that. Take Quentin Johnston. Send Quentin Johnston away. Go get Jayden Reed. I think you can get Reed at a discount right now that we could see him move back up the rankings in 2026 when he has a full offseason to fully get healthy, come back, be himself. I think we could see that happen. Jayden Reed, a player that I'm willing to go after in Dynasty leagues because I believe in the talent, and in Dynasty I'm willing to acquire the talent versus what they just did in the previous production. All right, guys, that's the first video back on the YouTube channel, getting back to the roots and creating some Dynasty content here for you. Appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, click that bell to get notified for when new content drops. Kyle Yates, you can follow all the social media, Kyle Y NFL on Twitter, Kyle Yates NFL over on Instagram, Kyle Y NFL over on TikTok. Appreciate you guys. Until next time, I'll see you.